Today I'm continuing with the book of Job, and the first two chapters again give backstory of who he is and what he is, and how he's a rich man that lived in Uz, and that was down in the south near Sheba, and also that he had 10 kids, and we don't know that they were sinners or anything. In fact, he prayed for them daily just in case, because they would feast like maybe one day a month or something like that at a different person's house, and maybe even feast at his. That's not recorded, but you get the idea. And so to cover their sins, that's what he was doing as the father archetype, as the patriarch. And he was a very powerful man, and he had a lot of stuff. He had a wife, and all of a sudden we know the story that there's a council in heaven that God brags on Job, and God then allows Satan to touch him first, and then later on go and touch his body. So the first thing he did in one period of time, he loses his cattle and his servants, he loses his family, he loses all of his stuff. Then Satan approaches God again, and he goes skin for skin. You know, you're protecting his skin. Okay, you can go touch his skin, but you can't kill him. God had allowed this. So we go into Job now, and again, Job soliloquizes, and so do his friends. And it's like Job and Eliphaz, Job, Bildad, Job, Zophar. It's like these guys speak in sequence. It's almost like they're primary, secondary, and trinary. Maybe they're all business partners. Maybe one of them is smarter than the other or whatever. But you have their arguments, and to read Job and see the argument, not just all of this. Like I was noticing in chapter 5 that something Eliphaz says, I've heard quoted by people, but it's quoted from Eliphaz, who got God wrong. So you got to be careful when you quote from Job, because you'll be quoting someone who got God wrong. But if you read him, it sounds like he's right. It sounds like, you know, well, God takes care of the meek, and he takes care of those who follow him. He doesn't let bad things, but bad things happen to bad things. Good things happen to good people. That's always been the quintessential. This isn't about good or bad happening to you. It's who you are and who God is, whether it's good or whether it's bad. See, that's really the ticket here. The ticket's not who is God in the equation. The ticket is who is God in either equation. Whether things are good with you or whether things are bad, God is still God. Now, this is not election. This is God showing himself strong in a negative consequence, a negative situation, and then at the end he shows himself strong in a positive situation. So we're looking at the differences there. Job opened his mouth, and he began, let the day perish that I was born, and the night that I was said, there's a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. He's not disdaining God, but he is saying, you know, he's kind of disdaining himself, that it's not good that I was born. If this is my lot in life, death would have been better. And he didn't know God was going to turn around. See, this guy had no promises of God like we do. He did know the power of God not the power of God. He knew the justice of God. He knew that he needed to take care of any kind of sinfulness that would happen between him and God. And we get the idea that, again, he only had, if we looked at the first, 15 or so chapters of Genesis, that's all he knew about God. But he knew enough about God that God was just and needed to be appeased. Now, if God wanted to also, in his frame of mind, do this to me, who am I to stop it? This isn't me giving in to some kind of election. It's saying God is powerful. God creates. There's a humility that he takes that, and there's he has some deep emotion here, but he doesn't blame God. He's not complaining to God as if you owed me something. I'm alive and you owe me something. He's like, you know what? I'm alive, but you don't owe me anything, and if you want to do what you're going to do, who's man to talk to God? And so he talks about that. We are actually very fortunate that God came to us. That's what depravity means, is that we wouldn't have gone to him. There was nothing we could bring to appease him. It's not that we're so bad we can't choose him. It's just even when we did, we had nothing. Even if we said, I want to be forgiven, there's no way you can do it. I have to do it myself. So let the stars of the twilight therefore be darkened. Let it look for light, and there be none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Why did I not from the womb? Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly. Why did the knees prevent me, and why did the breast give me suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept, then I would have had rest. He sees his existence as not being one of rest. Again, we don't know how long he'd been in this situation, how long he'd been sitting where he sat and living like he was living now. We have no idea how long he'd been there. He goes on in 3 talking about, I would have been with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as had an untimely birth, I had not been, as angels, as infants that had never seen light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and the weary be at rest. He's talking about the afterlife, where in his point of view there was rest. He didn't know about heaven or hell in our more Christianized understanding. But there is a place on the other side where there are kings and counselors. There's, people who died of untimely births, and infants that never saw light. But the wicked, there's no wicked there to trouble you. And the wicked there, you get to not just be wicked people, but wicked things happening, and there is rest. Now again, we know more about the other side than perhaps he did. There the prisoners rest together, they hear not the voice of the oppressor, the small and the great are there, and the servant is free from his master. He goes on to say, for the things which I have feared, if I have greatly feared, is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. The idea, and many people use this against him. They're kind of saying, well, if you hadn't been afraid of those things, God wouldn't have done them. And that's not going with what this guy's saying. He's saying, we all have things. I have things that I greatly feared. I feared losing all these things. I feared that my family would face destruction and heartache and pain, and yet all of that has come upon me. In a sense, we all fear that. If you're fighting for your family, if you're struggling for your life, even in this economy, yeah, you do kind of fear for those you care about. And so he's not too far off the beam when he does this. And so we have him saying that that I did these things, and that what I was afraid of came upon me. So his argument is that it should have never been born. Life's been rough and trouble. It's better on the other side, and the things that I feared most, even though I had, has come upon me. Eliphaz turns upon and starts communing and talking and saying, if we assay to commune with thee, will you be grieved? But who can withstand himself from speaking? So he's going, I can't sit here and just listen to you say this stuff. I have to interject. Well, usually that's somebody who thinks they know more than you. Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened feeble hands, and thy words have held up him that was falling, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. And now it's come upon thee, and thou faintest. It touches thee, and thou art troubled. He kind of starts him with an insult. It's like you've lifted up others, but now that it's happening to you, you're melting down. He doesn't come from a good encouragement place. And he starts giving his theology of who God is. And basically we know that his overall discussion is, like I mentioned before, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Remember, I prayed thee, who has perished being innocent? Or where are the righteous cut off? Even if I have seen, yet they plow iniquity, and sow wickedness, they reap the same. I've seen this. I've seen this happen. Again, his own eyes, his own circumstance. I've seen this happen. But just because you saw it doesn't mean that it's true. By the blast of God we perish, and by the breath of his nostrils we are consumed. In the roaring of the lion and the voice of the fierce lion. So he talks about, there was a thing hidden secretly brought to me. So he had this vision that he talks about, and I stood still and I listened to it, and the vision basically said, shall mortal man be more just than God? So that's what he took from all of this. You can't beat this game because you can't be more just than God. Well, I'm not trying to be more just than God. I'm trying to be just within God's precepts. See, we're not trying to be more just than God. We're not trying to be better than God. But that's what Eliphaz says he's doing. If you don't accept the punishment that God has given to you because of your sin, you're trying to be more just than God. That's his argument to him. He starts getting into theology about, call now if there be any answer, And to which of the saints will you turn? For wrath kills the foolish man, and envy slayeth the silly. I have seen the foolish taking root, but suddenly I cursed his habitation. His children are far from safety, and they are crushed in the gate, neither is there any to deliver them. Whose harvest the hungry eateth up, and is taken out of the thorns, and the robber swallows up their substance. He's talking about how I've seen these things happen, where bad things have happened to bad people. And he builds his theology. Later on, we'll see Job's argument is a little bit is that he's doing this because, there's a sense of him being afraid that, well, if God can do that to you, he can do that to me. In other words, my righteousness is not protection from God. You see the argument there? Job is not trying to protect himself from God. God wanted to do this, we're going to do it. He wants to stand. Actually, Eliphaz is building this argument of the God who only does good for the just and not bad, so that he could remain among the good, among the just, and protection. Sometimes, again, this is like what we would call fire insurance, and I know that Christ saves and all of this, but he wants his, whatever century this was, fire insurance, and that was his own goodness. His own righteousness will keep me out of the path of a God who will do this kind of thing to people. So that's why he builds this theology that I've seen this happen. I've seen bad things happen. And I would, if I were you, I would seek unto God, and unto God I would commit my cause, which doth great things and unsearchable things and marvelous things without numbers. He gives rain to the earth, etc. He goes into really appeasing God and really kind of talking God up. He taketh the wise in their craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried away. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope in the noonday as in the night. But he saves the poor from the sword, from the mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. The poor have hope, and iniquity stops her mouth. Behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. See, he really gets into this. This almost sounds like a Baptist sermon, but we have this good God who's this creator God. And you just need to call out to him, happy is the man whom God correcteth. God's correcting you. And that's where he's standing in his integrity, saying there's nothing here for him to correct. Now, I know that sounds like self-righteousness to us here, but we realize he, in his worldview, and probably he'd been prayed up and been praying over things and making sure there was no iniquity, that from his point of view, God would be unjust to cancel him, to chastise him for something he hadn't told him about. And here there was no reason for this to happen, as he could see. This is just God working, because that's like he said to his wife, speaketh thou as one that is a foolish woman. What, shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? That's his question. Is God only honor bound to do good for me? Can he also do evil to me if he wants to? The answer, of course, is yes. That your righteousness isn't a protection. And sometimes we want to go into Christianity as a protection. And it is a protection from the wrath of God, but it's only set up. It doesn't protect us from the evil of man. And God will allow negative things to happen to us. We are not protected from evil circumstances, from negative circumstances when you come into Christ. And sometimes people kind of preach this kind of thing. This sounds very modern, if you will, to preach a happy-go-lucky, love-centered, things can't go wrong, God's on your side, he's got your back, yay, rah, he's in the stands cheering for you. And that's kind of what Eliphaz is doing here. And he's doing this, and he's making these points. Happy is the man that God chastens. Oh, he's chasing you. Be happy that he's chastening. What does Eliphaz know that Job doesn't at this point? What sin can Eliphaz point out? Usually, if there was some consequence, some direct consequence that God was trying to chasten somebody, usually a Christian could point back to it. Well, how are you doing this? What are you doing here? How are you doing this? We can find that. So most of the chasing of God right now is usually just natural consequence. If you're going to be participating in something, you're going to get a negative consequence, If you're going to be doing this, and we can trace it back. So again, his argument here don't want to spend too much time on it there. That's it. That for he maketh sore and binds up the wounded, and his hands are and his hands make whole. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid with the scourge of the tongue, neither shalt thou be afraid of destruction. He goes on finishing the chapter. Thou shalt come to thy grave in a good old age, as a stalk of corn cometh up in his season. See, I've heard televangelists talk about this. I even heard a guy once say that if you tithe to me, I can guarantee your children will go to heaven. And literally said that. See, here's Eliphaz. He's really pointing, and he needs this to be true. He needs his righteousness. He needs this just God that takes care of the good who do good. He needs that God. This isn't just... I've noticed that how with Eliphaz and his friends, their arguments are all theological. But with Job, his arguments are real world. It's happening to him. See, sometimes our theologies are very distant. They're kind of aesthetic. They're kind of, philosophical. This was real world. He was really lost all of his family. He'd really lost his health in many ways. He'd lost all of his servants and all of his stuff. This was real world to Job. That's where, it's called the rubber hitting the road here. Many times our own theologies don't work for people that are really, really hurting. I've heard my wife say that she's seen that, people in foreign lands that are doing foreign missionary work can't really use election. It doesn't work to go in and say, well, you were chosen for heaven, but your dad that never heard the gospel, according to us, went to hell, and oh well, too bad to be him, kind of thing. Many of our theologies don't work with the hurt. They don't work on the ground. They don't work where the rubber hits the road where people are. They work only in the lofty minds of the people who created them. And here we see Eliphaz being that. And he really pushes this up. He sounds almost like a televangelist here. Oh, you'll be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with you. Oh my gosh, everything would smell great, and everything's going to be wonderful. When God's on your side, you can almost hear this. You can almost hear, people swaying in the background. But is it true of the nature of God? And that's where we go. And I only want to try to do argument, counter-argument, argument, counter-argument, and see those together. So we have Job's argument of, it's hard being me. I kind of wish I was out of here. If this is all it is, then it's better that I'd never been born than face all this sorrow and misery. And we can understand that. He's not blaming God. He's just saying, if this is my lot, it'd been better if I wasn't here. And Eliphaz is like, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with anyone saying that God would do this to any person unless they did something wrong. So anyway, we see where he's kind of got this televangelist thing going and really pumps the gas, on from 18 through 27 about, you'll be in league with the stones, and you'll know that thy tabernacle shall be at peace. Everything will be wonderful. All you got to do is Now, I do believe in repentance, and I do believe coming forth, but you know what to repent from. The law is given. You know what to repent from. Here, Job had covered all the bases. He'd done everything right. This would be like a man who kept all the Torah as much as he could. We do have the vicarious sacrifice. And again, we get the idea that he may have even done. He rose up early and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. So he would do 10 burnt offerings. Where do you learn about burnt offerings? From the people of God. Burnt offerings were happening before Moses. They just hadn't been formalized into Judaism. I mean, what was Abraham doing? He was going to go do a burnt offering to God. It wasn't created by Moses. We see it happening with Abraham that we think is a contemporary of Job. So all of this fits together. But to see the argument and later on the snarkiness and the coolness of the art of really looking at the quid pro quos back and forth makes this really interesting. So we're going to hold on, look at discourse, counter discourse, and see how they all play out, and meet these characters. And when you see them who they are, then you'll know more about what it's like to actually understand God. Because that's really what this is about. It's not that God just does what he wants. It's about he was understood by Job. And that's why he said, have you considered my servant Job? If you're going around looking for somebody who's following me, if you consider Job, he bragged on Job and put a bullseye on him and said, pull the trigger, Satan, he won't fall. How wonderful it would be. I don't want these bad things happening to me, of course. But how wonderful it would be for God to know you won't fall. Think about that. That would be so cool. Thank you.